Hello guys, and welcome back for another video. Today we're going to be talking Golden Age amusement parks and infantoriums, but we will start with the Golden Age of amusement parks, and the period of time we're looking at here is primarily 1900 to 1915, 1920. And as you can see by the article here, amusement parks were all the rage at the turn of the last century. And when I started looking into this topic a while ago, I was aware of the Coney Island amusement parks, but I didn't realize the number of, according to the official narrative, amusement parks there were. So during the Golden Age of amusement park, which for the purposes of this discussion is once again between 1900, 1898 maybe, to about 1915, 1920. As many as 2,000 parks, between 1,500 and 2,000 parks once operated at the ends of various streetcar lines around the country. And this is Forest Park, Chicago. I think this was opened, according to the official narrative, in maybe 1907, 1908, somewhere around there. So you had all of these parks which were at the end of these streetcar lines, and a lot of them were called trolley parks, because the trolley companies, according to the narrative, they built these streetcar lines and they wanted people to use their streetcar lines during the weekends, because most people didn't have vehicles until the 20s. So what they did, according to the narrative, is they built these parks at the end of the streetcar lines so that people had a reason to use the lines in the trolleys on the weekends, and thus the name trolley park. But in addition to that, you had the electric companies started popping up in the 1890s, and according to the narrative, they started buying up streetcar lines, and apparently I'm going to say that a lot, they also started building these parks at the end of the trolley lines. But because they owned the streetcar lines, they called these parks electric parks. So you'll see a lot of these amusement parks with that name, Electric Park. And in addition to that, you had a lot of parks with the title White City Amusement Parks. And I think they got their general design and inspiration from the World Fair in Chicago. And there were several of these White City amusement parks. And you also had Luna Parks, and you will probably are aware of the big one, which was in Coney Island, but there were several others. And you also had these parks called Wonderland Parks, which were all over, at least North America anyway. And you also, there was also a lot of parks that were privately owned, but we're talking like between 1,500 and 2,000 of these parks. So I just, the more I kind of looked at these things, I just have questions. So we're just going to be having a look and just asking questions. But this is Coney Island. These are probably, and this is a map or an image from 1905, 1906, Coney Island. And there were the three primary parks. Three of the more famous ones that were probably most people are aware of: Steeplechase Park. And you had this giant airship tower, and you had some smaller towers. But I believe this park in 1907 or 8 suffered a devastating fire, and it had to be rebuilt. And that's going to be a trend, devastating fires with these amusement parks. And Dreamland Park. Now, this particular park, and it had this giant iron tower, and it had this, a lot of these towers are termed electric towers. And a lot of these parks, they have this general setup with this ride called the chutes, and a toboggan would go down, and there would be a lagoon, and it would come to this tower. So this park caught fire, I believe it was, I can't remember if it was 1907 or 1911, but they didn't bother to rebuild this one. And then you have Luna Park, and it's got at least one tower, and I believe this suffered a fire too, but then they rebuilt it, and it had one of those chutes right at a lagoon, and there's a tower. So one of the more famous ones, and this is the Dreamland Park. And when you kind of look at these parks, it's just, here's a pagoda, and with an interesting antenna, here's a giant tower, a lot of electrification going on. And until I kind of looked further into these things, I thought something was going on, but now I really think something's going on, and we'll ask some questions here. But this is the a panoramic view of the ruins of the burnt district. I believe this is the Dreamland fire. And this was the Dreamland fire. The entire park. So I believe like 5 blocks burned to the ground. And I just happened to notice, 33 fire companies apparently responded. And anytime I see that number, I just it makes me want to ask some more questions. But yeah, so that park tragically gone. And names, and this is a park in Chicago called Forest Park in Chicago. And these places, they just have a really interesting look to them. And I believe sometimes you will find a construction photo, but you get this, right? Now, here you can kind of see, it tells us, okay, we're on the West Side Park here, Chicago. Apparently they're excavating the lagoon for this Forest Park in Chicago. But if I were to do this and just show you this, would you know where you are? Probably not, right? So, I mean, it's not really the kind of anything definitive that would make me think for sure, okay, I could scratch it off the list. So I kind of still have to ask questions about it. And this particular park, Forest Park, which again I think was built in 1907 as well, or 1908, when you start looking into it, it boasts several new and novel features not found elsewhere. It's talking about a coaster ride, but it also had wonderful pneumatic tubes which shoot people from one end of the grounds to the other at breakneck speeds. Just like really ambitious stuff, not like impossible, but 1907, 1908. And so it's just a lot of high tech into some of these parks. And this is a park called Celeron Park. And when I started looking at, here's a bandstand in the background, and I got a clearer picture. And when I see pictures like this is Celeron Park. And when I see, okay, you've got an octagonal bandstand, and I did a video called Octagons and Bandstands. If you haven't seen it, I think there's a little bit more to these bandstands. But when you see an antenna like this on a bandstand or a music stand, it makes me think there's more going on here than just a flagpole or a lightning rod. And not only do you have that, right behind it, we've got these onion domes with antennas on them. And this is just supposed to be like an amusement park, a trolley park, like with a campground or fairground down there. And I mean, really interesting architecture going on here. And I believe this is just a close-up of those two onion domes. And I think this is a pavilion, like a dance pavilion or something, which I believe catches fire in the 20s. So many things that look like this seem to catch fire. But yeah, a lot of interesting architecture with these amusement parks. And this is one of those electric parks, so claimed to be owned by the electric company. And this is Fort Smith, Arkansas. And highly symbolic with domes. And I can't tell. I wish I have a black and white picture, an image. It's a picture, I guess. I'm going to show it to you, but I wish I had an HD image of this. But just like really odd choices here, like not what we're kind of used to. And yeah, here's the black and white of it, and it's not far from high quality. But this crescent moon and the 5 and 6 pointed stars, they show up on a lot of things in these parks, and we might cover some of those. But this is also at that same electric park. 2 more onion domes. Sorry about the quality. This is the best I could find on it, but it's an auditorium, so they say, at Electric Park, Fort Smith, Arkansas, in these kind of keyhole shapes, and just interesting. And this was a white city in Indianapolis, and a lot of these parks, as I mentioned, they have the chutes ride, which empties into a lagoon, and there's an electric tower usually, and we got an octagon back here. And this white city, like so many others, this particular one, this white city was destroyed by fire. And it was in existence according to the narrative from 1906 to 1908. So yeah, these things don't usually last too long, and fire is usually a big culprit. So this is kind of the intro. I wanted to now look at some things I thought are going just a little bit more depth, and just point out some things I found interesting. So let's take a look. Okay, the first thing I'd like to talk about is a feature that shows up in a lot of these parks, and it shows up on other structures as well. But just to set the stage, this is a park called Lakeside Park in Colorado, and I think it might be still in existence, but it started out as a white city amusement park, and I believe it's been privately owned, and it's changed its name to Lakeside Park, and I think the date is something like 1908, or usually they're all right around there, but for its construction. And what I want to point out is these, I don't even know what to call them in this context, but these domed, you have a dome structure here with an antenna, and these things, they're just all over this park, and they're in a lot of parks, and they're in other places. And we've got here, they're using them for potted plants, and you can see that they're fairly large, but we just stick flagpoles on these things and put potted plants in here. But I'm wondering, is there more to this than just a place to put plants? Because if you see this on top of a building, we would call it a cupola. But here, I'm not even sure what the correct term would be, but I'm thinking there's more to these, and let me show you why I think that. So this is on the right here, what you're looking at is a cupola, and this is this is a white city park called Revere Beach. It's in Revere Beach in Massachusetts, I believe. But this is one of the structures called the pit. But on top of it, you'll see this on a lot of structures, and it's called a cupola with an antenna. And I can't see what's in there, but you see it on a lot of buildings. And you look at these, and you kind of zoom out here. There's a lot of similarities. You've got a dome with an antenna. The structure's a little more closed, but not far off. And then this is just the same park, lakeside, and different view. And you also have, they have these, I believe this is an octagon with a nice looking antenna. So I don't know if a bandstand, a gazebo there, but a lot of these structures that I'm now questioning. And this is just another shot. A lot of these large towers, usually over 100 feet tall. And here's another shot of this gazebo and these things. And yeah, so this is a mosque. I believe it's in Pakistan. And I think it would translate, the name would translate roughly to like Friday Mosque. Yeah, look at all these. Look at this. Hey, isn't that crazy? Look at the size of this entrance too. But look, I mean, now take a look at the on the bottom here, all these on the top of the building, and all these at the park. Now there's the biggest real difference is the antenna. But you know, I don't believe that, like a lot of people, I don't think the churches are strictly churches, and I don't think the mosques are strictly mosques or places of worship. They could be, but they'd probably be more than that. So I don't know what makes this design anything special. I mean, were there bells maybe hanging from here? I don't know. But I don't think this is just a random spot for these. And I don't think they were meant for potted plants initially. It's just, I think, lost technology. And this is a park called the Chutes in San Francisco, I believe. And again, you know, you got this theater, sometimes massive antenna, two structures. If this was in a park, again, you know, this would be called a bandstand or a gazebo. Here it's a cupola. So it just rears its head all over the place. This is a Woodside Amusement Park, Philadelphia. It's poor quality image from 1906. But again, these cupolas, always antenna, usually domed. And this was an image from a Russian blog called tartaria.info. I'll leave a link. But in that blog, the author was discussing the propulsion of some ships from the 1800s, late 1800s. And this is, I believe, this is a sketch from a book, I believe it's like the 1860s. But you've got these cupolas, but on a ship. And I don't know, there's animals. I think the thrust of the article was talking about the lack of sails or smokestacks, indicating it would be steam powered. Just questioning the mode of it, how it's moving. And let's zoom out here. But yeah, so you got a sketch here from, I believe it was around 1860. And you have this amusement park in Philadelphia, 1906, and they're on top of the roof. And here they're on a boat. So, and back in Lakeside Park, the first image and park we looked at, they're at the end of the lagoon, and they have plants in them. So, probably a big piece of the puzzle, and don't really know what. There's something obviously missing. Don't know what it is, but we're just asking questions at this point. So first thing, so now we're going to take a look at something else. Another aspect to some of these parks that I'd like to touch on is this concept of eagles with outstretched wings on top of the towers, and that may represent active electromagnetic fields or fields. And I've heard that theory proposed, and I don't know, but I'm not opposed to it, and I think it's a possibility. This is the Dreamland Park, and this is the Electric Tower. This is the Dreamland Park at Coney Island. And you can see on this tower, you had all these eagles, outstretched wings, and one on the at the very top. And I think this is just a close-up. And when I was doing my last video called Mud Flood Affected, I was looking at this park called Jenks Park in Central Falls, Rhode Island, and there was this tower called Cogswell Tower, and the date given for the tower was 1904, and there was an eagle with outstretched wings on the top of that. But there's this photo here which shows that this was the base of the structure, which was mud flood affected, and I showed that in my last video. But there's no tower here, so I just assumed that the tower, they were being truthful with that, at least that it was built in 1904 after the fact. But somebody pointed out to me, you have this sort of vanilla sky effect where they, potentially this was the speculation of a commenter saying maybe the tower was actually cropped out of the grayed out of the shot to kind of justify the more recent time frame. So I don't know, interesting possibility, but just something to consider. And what else I wanted to point out real quickly here is this pattern. This is the Luna Park at Coney Island, and I believe there's these 8 petals here. And if you look at some of these electric towers or these towers, this is from the Midwinter Fair, San Francisco, I believe, 1894, and I can't remember the name of this tower, like a Bonet Tower or something like that. But it also had this similar pattern. And where I'm going with this is I've seen a combination of the eagle with outstretched wings and this pattern that we see on some of these towers and in some of these parks. And that I came across that at a place called the Sutro Baths. And again, this is in San Francisco. But the claim, I'm going to be talking about this place in a future video, but you got cupolas on it. It's supposed to be a bathhouse, and there are some construction photos for it, but I'm going to question some of those in a future video. But there's a lot going on in this place, and I think we inherited this place. But when I was looking around for photos on the interior of this place, this bathhouse, there was this obelisk tower-ish with an eagle, outstretched wings, and appeared to me to be 8 sections, but 8 petals. But I just thought it was interesting. I don't think this place is a bathhouse at all. But there was another image, and this reminds me of the scene from The Shining when they're at the very end and they're all posing in the bar for some reason. But not only is there one, but he's got a buddy over here. So I don't know if there's anything to that symbolism and the outstretched wings. I'm not sure, but I just wanted to point that out to you. And I'm going to touch on one more thing. For this is going to be part 1. I'm going to have to do a part 2, and we're going to go into a little bit more depth. And so the last thing I kind of wanted to touch on here for part 1 is I think they even, the powers that be, the controllers, the people behind the curtain. I think they even tag some of these parks. This is a white city, I believe, in Indianapolis, and you got the Third Degree, and I think they turn this into a ride, and I think you might see this in other parks at Coney Island too, but I believe this to be an owl here. And these are interesting, but what else I wanted to point out is going back to that lakeside park that we were looking at the very beginning, or pretty close to the beginning, the park in Colorado. When you get to the park, what greets you is one of the entrances. You got your 33rd degree. They tagged this park right at the entrance, just so you know what you're getting yourself into here. But I just wanted to point that out. It kind of stuck out to me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap it up for here, part one, and I'm going to leave you with a short 1-minute clip of a long gone, I believe it's a Luna Park, and it's just a short clip. But we're going to be back with a little bit. We're going to ramp things up a little bit in part two, and it's going to get interesting. So stay tuned. And until next time, take care. Bye.
A fantasy land ahead of its time, nestled in Scranton.
This is where you came to see everything. All kinds of acts from all over the world, acrobats and musicians, magicians, you name it.
Luna Park opened its gates in 1906, attracting hundreds of thousands of people each year. But just 10 years after opening, disaster struck as a massive fire swept through the park. The damage, too large to overcome.
Ellie never determined what caused that fire, but the insurance had lapsed, which was one of the main reasons why they couldn't afford to rebuild Luna Park. They tried to, but it just didn't really work out. So unbelievable that there was an amusement park to that magnitude in Scranton 100 years ago.
Those pictures are so beautiful and immaculate, and it's just amazing that 100 years later, there's almost nothing left. You know, just what time can do and nature can do is really amazing.
It's unbelievable. The construction of I-81 just kind of knocked out most of it.
Great story, though.
Yeah.